Tonight, for the first time, we are in the east coast town of St Andrews. It has Scotland's oldest university and is the world-famous home of golf. A third of the population in the town during term time are students. Tonight, we're joined by people of different ages and different political backgrounds as well. What do they want to talk about? Let's find out. Welcome to Debate Night. Debate Night is the show where the people get to ask the big questions, answering them on our panel here this evening. Countryside campaigner James Melville. James grew up on a farm in Fife and founded No Farmers, No Food to voice the concerns of the countryside. He also appears regularly to share his views on GB News and Talk TV. From the Scottish Conservatives, Roz McCall is MSP for Mid-Scotland and Fife and party spokesperson for children and young people. Roz was inspired to get into politics following the independence referendum, and after a career in business, she was elected 3 years ago. Melanie Ward is the Scottish Labour MP for Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy. Melanie was elected to Westminster last year and was quickly appointed Parliamentary Private Secretary to Ian Murray in the Scotland office. Before politics, she was CEO at Medical Aid for Palestinians and was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential global health workers. From the SNP, the MP for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East, Seamus Logan. Seamus was born in Northern Ireland and studied at Stirling University before moving to North East Scotland. He worked in health and social care for over 30 years and is now the party spokesperson for health and social care and rural affairs. And finally, from the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Jamie Greene, MSP for West Scotland and party spokesperson for economy and finance. Jamie spent 9 years as a Scottish Conservative MSP, but defected earlier this year, saying he felt politically homeless and scunnered with the party. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And welcome to our studio audience here in St Andrews. It's great to be with you here for the very first time. And you can join in the discussion from home, wherever you happen to be tonight in Scotland. BBC DN is the hashtag you need if you are on social media. And our Debate Night podcast will be available for you to download straight after the show. So let's get started. Our first question of the night comes from Dr. Jacqueline Pearson. Jacqueline, evening.
Good evening. So I've recently immigrated to Scotland. Can you comment on the Prime Minister's recent suggestion that the UK risks becoming an island of strangers with a Scottish perspective?
Thank you, Jacqueline. The Prime Minister's comments came as he unveiled a crackdown on immigration, promising to cut net migration and tighten every part of the system. Melanie Ward, do you agree with the language on this, that the UK risks becoming an island of strangers? Is that the right thing to say?
Well, my experience of this is that both locally here in Fife, in my constituency, and across the whole country, it's actually the kindness of strangers that underpins so many of our day-to-day actions, whether that's in the NHS or in care homes. It is often those interactions between total strangers which underpin our communities. And I think we have to look at actually the detail of what the Prime Minister was saying this week, and that is a recognition that lots of people across our country feel that net immigration has become too high. Under the Conservative government over the last 4 years, net immigration quadrupled, and we have to get to a place where our immigration system is well managed, where people who do have a right to be here because they are fleeing war or persecution are treated humanely and get quick decisions about whether or not they have a right to be here. And if they do, they are welcomed here, and if they don't, then they are quickly returned back again. People don't like to see chaos and boats crossing at our southern borders, and that's why the government has taken so much action to return over 20,000 people and get decisions much more quickly. 900
arrived just in the last few days across the Channel. Keir Starmer promised to smash the gangs. That's not happening, is it?
It's beginning to happen, and that's why the only way to do this, there aren't quick fixes to this. We have to work with international partners to go back to the root of this. That's about working with lots of countries in Europe to try and tackle it. But what we also have to have is make sure that our economy can function properly with the skilled workers and the skills that it needs. And we have a real-life example of that here in Fife, where we have a major defence company. We've got more investment coming into the defence industry because of the Labour government, because we're living in such a dangerous world. That's the right thing to do. But because of the SNP Scottish Government's long time underinvestment in our skills, Here in Scotland, we have 84,000 young people who are not in education, employment or training. They should be getting skilled up to do these well-paid, really good defence jobs.
Rather than migrants.
And instead, we're having to bring workers in internationally.
Okay.
I don't think that's a sustainable situation, and it's not good for our young people.
All right, let me hear from the audience here. Man in the white T-shirt in the end of the row. Yes?
Keir Starmer's smashing the gangs. He's starting to. Patrick went across there from JB News just the other day and went round and done blatant show what is actually happening across there. How many gangs has he smashed? How many people has been arrested?
OK. All right, let me pick up on some of these points, but the man on the back row as well. Yes, on you go.
Hi, the question was about Keir Starmer's language, not about immigration.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't think the SNP have got any control over immigration. That's Westminster.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, well, but you want to have control over aspects of it, don't you?
Well, absolutely.
And you've written to Keir Starmer about this.
Yes, I did, and I'll come back to that very point in a second. But first of all, to get to Jacqueline's question, Keir Starmer's language and use of language was a disgrace, and let's make no bones about that. The Prime Minister or his speechwriter, whoever it was channeling Enoch Powell from 1968. And just remember, there are some people in the audience who will remember, Enoch Powell was sacked the next day by Ted Heath for using that language. So that's how bad it was. Now, the other thing about this is that this is a Scottish programme. We're not speaking about the national picture here. This is Scotland. The picture in Scotland with regard to immigration is very different from other parts of these islands, because in Scotland, we have a falling birth rate, we have growing numbers of older people, we have a shrinking workforce, and we must address that. And the only way to do it is through migration. Now, I want to come to Melanie's point about 84,000. The rubber hits the road at a local level in every constituency. In my constituency, there are only 1,500 people who are receiving unemployment benefit or, job seekers allowance or universal credit. 250 of them are between the ages of 18 and 24. 250. Yet in every sector, health, social care, tourism, fishing, farming, fish processing, we've got labour shortages. How are we going to fill that with 250 young people in my constituency?
But across Scotland, there's 1 in 7 young people are not in education, employment or training at the moment. What about them?
It's not as simple as just to say those people are sitting at home twiddling their thumbs. There are different facets to that. Some of the people who are claiming those benefits are actually in part-time employment. I know there is a different picture across the country, but what I said still holds true. We need migrant workers to help us run the essential services and to grow the economy, Stephen.
OK, let me just hear, just a second, let me hear from man in the short sleeve shirt down here. Yes.
So, Seamus, you say we need migrant workers, but number one, if we already have the skills, or we have had the skills here, it just so happens that all of them choose to leave Scotland. So many skilled workers have chosen to leave Scotland, whether it's to Canada, New Zealand, Australia, because they see that as being a better life. What can, for lack of a better word, what can your party do, you're running the Scottish Government, do to keep them skilled workers here to where then you don't have to rely on the chance that these migrants are going to choose to move to Scotland as opposed to England?
Seamus.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair point you're making, and always the grass seems greener on the other side. But this is a land of opportunity too. And to come back to that point about what the SNP can do about this, we asked recently in a debate in the House of Commons for a Scottish visa, or for powers to be devolved to Scotland so that we could deal with this problem ourselves. Before the election, Anas Sarwar said that he supported that he was in favour of devolving powers to Scotland for immigration. And look what's happened. After the election, he's walked away. Now he says he supports Keir Starmer's position. OK, thank you. Lady with the blonde hair on the second row. Yes.
With almost a third of all social care staff coming from overseas currently, how on earth are we going to solve the social care crisis if we've shut down the social care visa? And I know that we're not responsible for it in Scotland, but surely Scotland has to have a voice of what happens at Westminster level. Yeah, James Melville.
I share the opinions. I think it was appalling what he said. Words matter. And Keir Starmer, there's context here, historical context. Keir Starmer has built his entire legal and also political career been pro pretty much freedom of movement, unlimited migration. And for him to have suddenly the barefaced cheek to change the narrative, and we all know why he's done it, is because he's been spooked by what happened in the local elections with the surge of reform. And it's about trust. You stick to your principles. It's okay to change your opinions if circumstances say so, but he's done it because the vote said so, but also the language he used. Well, Britain has been built in many ways, especially since the 1945 post-war settlement, on the benefits of aspects of migration, going back to Windrush communities and so on. There is also, on the other side of it, a debate to be had about the levels of net migration and the cost to the taxpayer of the hotels, of migrants. It is possible to have all those views at the same time. But we have a Prime Minister who's, quite frankly, using language, and also on his X feed, social media feeds, where he's sounding like a cosplay version of a reform politician. And considering where he stood on immigration for the last 20, 30 years, I find that disingenuous, and it isn't any wonder that the public, even those within his own party now, are coming out and saying, well, what do you actually stand for?
Melanie, is that what's happening here? Is this all because of reform, the rise of reform?
I don't think that's what's happening here. It's been known for quite a long time, and I think most people on the panel know that the levels of immigration are a concern for lots of people. I want to come back to the point about social care that was made rightly by the lady in the audience, but also the point about skills. We have to ask, why is it that so many sectors in our economy are having to bring in workers from overseas? In the social care sector, for example, a hugely important job that our care workers do, massively important, primarily done by women as it happens, but for a long time on poverty pay. And that's why we in the Scottish Labour Party and as SARWA has been clear, we need to see wages rising in the social care. The SNP wasted, I think, £30 million it was, looking at putting together a national care service to resolve some of these issues in the workforce and in our social care system, and then canned it. And I think Seamus has to answer for why is it that we've got this skills gap. If you talk to any employers here in Fife, they'll tell you that after nearly 20 years of SNP rule in Scotland, the skills gap we have is the biggest problem. And what do they have to say about that?
One question, back to words matter. Do you agree with the words that he actually used, an island of strangers? Do you agree with those actual words that he stated?
They're not the words that I would have used. I've talked about what I think about that. But I think what he was saying was actually very clear and is about sorting out our immigration system.
Jamie Greene?
Let's be clear. I want to ask you, why do you think he chose those words? He's got advisors writing speeches for him. He used and picked his words carefully and purposefully. Why would he choose language like that? Let me tell you, the elephant in the room is because the Labour Party got absolutely trounced in the English Council elections a couple of weeks ago, and they're panicking. This is nothing more than a knee-jerk reaction to a very serious, complicated issue. I want to go back to the very original question to Dr. Jacqueline. First of all, you are very welcome here, and I think we need to make that loud and clear. Anyone that comes here and brings their skills, their family, and sets up life in Scotland to fill those skills gaps that we have, and I'll get on to that in a second, but you are very, very welcome here, and we should be thankful for you. And I must say this, I'm not a Labour supporter, I never have been, but I am dismayed that the Labour Party, of all parties in this country, have been reduced to this sort of language, this sort of dog whistle politics that I kind of would have expected from other political parties. It is nothing more than a knee-jerk reaction. What we want to see from the Prime Minister, he's in a great position of privilege and power in this country, is to be careful with his use of language. We need to make sure that people who come here legally and bring their skills and benefit our communities and our economies and our social care sector, make them feel welcome. We need more of them, not less.
But Jamie, he also knows that in parts of the UK, there is real concern about levels of migration.
Yeah, sure. The way to deal with that...
What's he supposed to do in the circumstances?
But you can't conflate this issue. We talk about immigration as if it's some homogenous group of people, right? People who come here illegally, and there are many who do, and I think there's consensus that they should be returned. But there are people who come here with skills, there are people who migrate here on proper visas, and they bring their families with them and they contribute to society. You cannot conflate these issues. And just talking about immigration as this bad thing, I think is the wrong approach. I think actually it puts down those people who have made Scotland or the UK their home. And I think the Labour Party really should be ashamed of itself right
If you
now.
actually look at the substance of what was said, that was not it. But I think it would be interesting to know what do you think? I think you were a Tory for quite a long time, now a Lib Dem. What do you think should be done about the skills gap that we have in Scotland? We have to talk about the underlying issues of what's going on in our economy and how do we make sure that our young people can get really good jobs in the future. They're being failed right now.
I agree with you on that, and I will answer that directly, and I don't think we should let Seamus and the SNP off the hook on this. The reason we have skill shortages in Scotland is massive and chronic underfunding of our colleges and university sector, and everybody knows that. So there is a devolved responsibility on skills, on training, on education that the SNP government in Scotland has to take responsibility for.
All right, Seamus, I'll let you come back in a second, but Roz, you haven't had a chance to speak about this.
No, I haven't.
So is the answer to all of this for Scotland to have control over migration itself?
No, I don't think it is. I think that has to be reserved. It's my
why? If we've got
is,
specific needs, why can't we answer them?
Well, there's a couple of reasons that I think. So first and foremost, we don't have we have open borders within the United Kingdom. That there's no way to stop the movement of people within that. So I think it should be a reserved issue. But I think on top of that, we have to look at what's actually happening. We've got an issue. There is an issue regarding immigration. I accept the variances on how you talk about that, but we do have an issue, and there's lots of people who are concerned about the amount of immigration coming into the United Kingdom. But not a lot of people are coming to Scotland. There's no reason for them to stay in England or other parts. They're not coming to Scotland. And this idea that we need, that this is the land of milk and honey. I'm very proud Scot. I love Scotland very dearly. But people aren't moving here, and there's lots of reasons.
Jacqueline is. She asked the question.
Absolutely, and I also agree entirely with Jamie, and very much welcome, and you are welcome here. And I think what we've got to realise, Fife College had to cancel a social care programme just last year because they couldn't do the placement section of the course. That was a full year of social care with people in it in Fife that had to be cancelled. And that entirely comes down to the SNP and their inability to actually do the job they need to do when it comes to skilling up our workforce. And there's a big, big issue there. And we have that there. We have the resources here, and we have the people here to do that.
Okay, Seamus,
but we're being let down.
I will let you come back in a second. We've got so many hands up in the audience. Man with the glasses on the back. Yes, on you go.
My wife and son came here 6.5 years ago from Thailand. I spent best part of £18,000 on visas, every 2.5 years, NHS immigration fees, adoption for my son through the Hague Convention, the United Nations Hague Convention. Within 6 months of my wife being here, she'd set up her own business. She earns more than me, and I've been in IT for over 25 years. My son could not speak a word of English when he came here. He is now fluent. He's a second-place world champion bagpiper. Immigrants bring massive benefits to Scotland.
Thank you, thank you. Man down here. Yeah, on you go.
I don't believe it's very fair to blame Keir Starmer. Clearly the man is not a leader. And clearly he gets told what to say, what to do, how to say it. And also he's got scripts. I mean, the man, for lack of a better word, is a cutout. That's all he is.
Well, he's not here to answer for himself tonight on that. Man with the beard. There, yeah, on you go.
I haven't heard anybody on the panel mention that the ONS figures are about to come out and show that inward migration to the UK has fallen drastically. Like, literally by hundreds of thousands. Okay? So the next set of numbers that are coming out...
That's next week. Yeah.
Next week are going to show that there's been a big drop. Now, that says to me that Keir Starmer is up there talking tough because of reform battering them. Yeah. And he's timing it nicely to be able to get these numbers out and show himself to be taking action, in inverted commas. And to be quite honest with you as well, I'm pretty uncomfortable with this whole skills gap thing. I'm nowhere near as qualified as the doctor is here. I'm nowhere near as entrepreneurial as this gentleman's wife is. I'm in a fairly all right job. I'm comfortable enough, I'm happy enough. I'm Irish, but I'm an immigrant to this country. We might have the CTA, but to talk about immigrants as if they have to add value, I think is pretty disgusting. Like, the net contribution of immigrants has been shown time and time again, not on an individual basis, but as a group, immigrants contribute more than they use in services.
James?
I share the sentiments, and I think one of the frustrations I've got with the whole debate about immigration, which has been boiling up for quite some time, is that everything's lumped into the same place. And Starmer's comments don't help with that, because people end up moving the debate away from, as you said, about the benefits of immigration over the last 60, 70 years, of which there's many, and we should never lose sight of that, versus the fact that there is obviously some very, very high figures over the last 3 or 4 years on net migration, the boats issue, the cost on hotels. You can say that at the same time as showing the benefits of immigration in terms of legal immigration. You can have that discussion. But what's happening with the debate is it's becoming extreme. So people are getting accused of being bigots, of being racist, but because they're concerned about aspects that are happening in their community. But at the same time, people are also being dismissed because they want to showcase the benefits, of which there's many of immigration. Somewhere, like most of the issues, the balance lies in the middle. And the problem with Keir Starmer's comment, after 20 years of not saying that stuff, he's now gone down this sort of dog-whistling rhetoric that only frames more division on something that is a very, very difficult and complex set of issues to consider on immigration. And I think, going back to the first point, we all know the reason why he's doing it.
Seamus.
Well, Stephen, thanks for letting me back in. I knew it was going to be a kick the SNP night, but it was also becoming a kick Seamus night for a minute or two there. Look, there's an important point here, and I shouldn't have to tell Jamie and Melanie and Roz this. Immigration is a reserved matter. It is not a power that is within the gift of Holyrood. And this is part of the problem. And the reason why Keir Starmer's words matter is that that translates into problems on the ground for people who have come to this country and face hate and face antagonism and face hurt. Now, Melanie, I will accept that there is an issue here about our young people and bringing them into some of these jobs. And I have the huge regard for people who work in social care. But social care, hospitality, these types of jobs, these are entry-level jobs. Why is it that we can't persuade our existing workforce to come into them?
Because they're not getting paid properly by the SNP.
It's not just, no, it's not.
That's the reality of it.
Well, the thing about this is that they compete in a local economy with supermarkets, checkout people, with people who stack shelves. This is the economic reality.
These are not entry-level jobs. These are vital jobs in our communities and society.
As I say,
these are people that look after our
people who work
relatives,
in
look
social
after
care,
our neighbours.
personal experience of that.
You know, give them some respect.
And what about the defence sector?
Please, let me finish, because you all had a good say. I just want to point out, as I said at the beginning, our birth rate is falling, the numbers of older people are growing, and our workforce is shrinking.
OK, all right, this is a debate I know we'll come back to. It's a very live one across the country at the moment. Your views on it, the hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Next week, we're going to be in Dumfries. The week after that, it's a Hamilton by-election special. So if you'd like to be in the audience for either of those shows, go to our website, bbc.co.uk/debate night, or you can scan the QR code. Let's go to the second question of the night, which comes from Janet Lovett. Janet, evening.
Good evening. What are the panel's views on assisted dying?
Thank you. The assisted dying bill yesterday passed its first stage by 14 votes at Holyrood. Pam Duncan-Glancy, who appears often on this programme, MSP, said she was heartbroken by that result. And the Royal College of Psychiatry today voiced their opposition against the proposal in England and Wales as it stands for various reasons. They said, Jamie Greene, you voted for it yesterday. Why? And how much soul-searching went into that, Jamie?
My goodness, I mean, I've been in Holyrood for 9 years, and it was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever had to make in politics. I went into that debate with a very open mind. I didn't have any preconceptions about how I was going to vote. My original intention, actually, to be honest with you, was to abstain on the vote, to allow it to progress through the parliamentary process. But I sat in that debate room for 4.5 hours yesterday listening to really emotional, difficult stories on both sides of the argument. I've got so much respect for everyone who spoke yesterday, both, you know, those that opposed it and those that supported the legislation.
And what turned it for you?
Well, you know, I sat there and listened to speech after speech, and the stories, the heartbreaking stories of people facing, you know, an abominable situation through pain and distress, and there's just so many stories that one after another to sit there. You couldn't be helped but moved by that. And on the balance of whole, I also listened to the arguments opposing the legislation, and they made some really good points about some of the concerns they have around safeguarding and the definition of terminal illness and so on. And I think those need to be addressed, those need to be fixed. So there's no guarantees that I or even many others in the Parliament will vote for this bill at stage 3. But what I would like to see is Parliament do its job properly, to put it to the test properly through stages 2 and committee stage, and as a Parliament at stage 3. It's going to have to be amended very heavily and properly if it will become law. If it is not, I will not support it.
OK, thank you. I know we've got doctors in the audience tonight, other medical professionals as well. Lady with the glasses, right in the middle.
Yeah, hi. I'm opposed to assisted dying for a very good reason, that it can be abused. I wonder why palliative care and hospice services are not improved substantially to deal with people who are at the end stage of life. And another thing I'd like to know is why is this being decided by 129 people in Holyrood when it should be put to the country for a referendum?
OK, thank you. Roz McCall, you voted against.
I did vote
Roz,
against.
why?
Well, it's... I have to say, again, I haven't been in Parliament for 9 years like Jamie. It's 3 for me, but this was probably the most difficult and harrowing process I think I've ever gone through in my life. I very much wanted to hear both sides of the argument all the way through, and have done. I have spoken face-to-face with people who are going through horrific illnesses and are begging to have that choice for themselves. And I have spoken to many groups on the other side, many people on the other side who are very, very nervous about the erosion, about it being contested on human rights grounds, and that disappearing, and that ability for them to actually sort of have an end of life with palliative care, with the proper resources that should be there and afforded at the end of life. So it was a very, very difficult process. And on reflection, my decision came down 24 hours beforehand. I decided that the process through the legislation process, I don't believe is going to be able to bring in the safeguards at stage 2 and stage 3 to make sure that we are not putting the most vulnerable in our society into a situation that they should not be in. And I was very concerned that the process just would not be able to do that, and therefore I voted against it at stage 1. But I feel great sympathy for the many, many people, hundreds, if not thousands, of emails we received over the piece on this, who are disappointed that some people voted against and it's not going straight through. We do have a chance to debate this. I don't know what that would be like to be at the end of your life trying to decide how you...
So why not let the people decide with a referendum? If there's ever a subject to let the public decide on, why not this one, on that lady's point?
Well, we know referendum can be particularly divisive, and the problems with all of this, again, with 14 votes is very, very, very close, and you would polarise. And as much as I didn't really want to be in the position where I'm trying to make that decision, there can only be legislative change to make this change, and therefore the elected members...
One thing I think we will agree on, we voted for and against, and I think it was done very respectfully. It was actually Parliament at its best.
Yes.
You know, I really wish every piece of legislation that we voted on was debated in the same way. You know, the problem with the party whip system is people are just told what to read out. Yesterday was stunning in the way that people brought their personality and their own experiences to Parliament. We need more of that. But the point the lady made about palliative care came up yesterday a lot, actually. I don't think the two should be separated. We should be improving palliative care as well as debating this other serious issue.
Absolutely.
Now, and the reason that's so important is because we know that palliative care is failing so many people, which is perhaps why so many people support this legislation. But this bill has been debated 3 times in Holyrood. And for the last 15 years, every time they debate this bill, they also say that palliative care is not working for people. That has to end. The Scottish Government and its ministers need to listen to all the concerns that were raised about palliative care. It has to improve, come what may, whatever happens to this bill.
OK, this affects every single one of us, so let's hear from the audience. Man in the very back row first, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, obviously, we're Scottish and we're political, and there's a natural inclination to just knock it before we've tried it. Is this not a great opportunity for everybody on the panel and Scottish politics in general to make the very best of what the Scottish Parliament is meant to do? There are meant to be 3 more debates on this. There's meant to be a committee stage about this. This is when we should be setting party political divides aside, when we should be having expert testimony. This is why I don't think this is a subject for referendum. I'm in no way educated enough to make those kind of decisions, but there are a huge number of people within Scotland who have the skills, who have the knowledge to bring to this debate, and this is surely an opportunity for the Scottish Parliament to be at its finest, rather than just trying to tear people down on party political lines.
Thank you, thank you. Lady on the end, down here.
It's a very contentious debate and subject. Personally, I've lost a close family friend due to terminal illness, MND. However, I am worried for myself and for many people that have disabilities, because the fear is of where does the line drawn on what counts as an illness that is a burden to society. And that's words that have been used, as words like a burden and being afraid of being a burden on your family, on your community. Where is the line drawn and how do you safeguard?
Thank you, thank you. Man with the glasses, the second row, yes.
I suffer from anxiety, which leads to depression, and it has given me suicidal ideation to the point where the state has put me off killing myself. What happens when the state is no longer there to stop that happening?
You worry this is the start of a...
Yes, it would be, you know, I'm adult enough and possibly manipulative enough to persuade people that I'm so depressed and so ill that I want to go.
Thank you.
Who stops me?
Yeah, and just the lady behind you as well, while we're there. Yes, on you go.
So, as a physician working in the NHS, also as an immigrant, but I know that the majority of the palliative care that we do is actually done through general practice, not through hospices, not through secondary palliative care services. We know that care in the last year of life in this country is utterly inadequate at this time. It's not a fair choice to give someone the opportunity to choose between poor care and a hastened death. What are you doing to improve care in the last year of life so that it's a fair choice?
Okay, okay, thank you. Seamus, the SNP, there's another vote coming up in England and Wales as well. The SNP didn't take part in the vote last time. On that lady's point, though, what's going to change here?
Well, to be clear with everyone, obviously I'm an MP at Westminster. The bill in Westminster relates to England and Wales. That's why the SNP did not take part in the debate and will not vote in the Westminster Parliament on that legislation in exactly the same way as I'm not going to insert myself into the debate that's going on in Holyrood. I was very impressed. Jamie is absolutely right. The debate was very respectful, it was dignified, there was a lot of compassion and empathy shown around the chamber. But there's a few other things to say about this as well. I've met Liam MacArthur a couple of times, and I think he's a very compassionate individual, but I wish that he would stop speaking about making this matter unforgivable if we don't address it. That's not the sort of language that I think we should be using here. I think we need to understand that it's not necessarily a divisive issue. It's something that we can all speak about as human beings and reach views upon. The issue that's been raised there is a very pertinent one, because the Royal College of Psychiatrists have now said that they have very deep concerns about some of these issues. I also have concerns about palliative care. The difficulty that I see is that if you invest in this area, it could undermine any future investment in palliative care. There are other issues to do with how this is going to be operated, how are doctors and the legal profession, social workers...
We are, and palliative care is clearly not good enough in this country.
It has not been good enough, and that's something that's true right across these islands. There is a strategy under development at the minute. I think the consultation on it closed in January. And we'll see where that goes. There's no question that palliative care needs to be improved. But I'll say one final thing at this point, Stephen. An awful lot of good has come out of this discussion in that we speak now about death and dying in a way that we haven't done for a long time, and that's good. But we also need to be very clear that many, many people have a very happy and peaceful death, and we don't want to be spreading fear among people that death has got to be something that's got to be a disaster for everybody. It can be a very peaceful and decent experience.
Young man down in the front row here.
You talk about studies and consultations, but the SNP has been in power for a very long time. I'm just wondering why nothing has been done to fund palliative care and move this forward in the past few years.
Well, of course, we could have done more, and we will do more. But, you know, there is a paradox here. At the same time as this debate is being had in Westminster with Kim Leadbeater's bill, Keir Starmer's government have applied additional national insurance costs on hospices, on people like Macmillan nurses, on people like Marie Curie nurses. And even today in Parliament, I think the leader of the Conservative Party referenced a figure of 250,000 for one hospice that she was visiting. You know, that's not really going to help palliative care, because the people who are delivering it are those hospices, those Marie Curie nurses, those Macmillan nurses.
Melanie Ward?
I mean, it's always Westminster's fault, isn't it? I mean, the SNP have been in power in Scotland for almost 20 years now. In fact, our UK Labour government sent an extra £5.2 billion to Scotland for
All
this
roads lead to
year
Westminster, Melanie.
alone. And that is a massive amount of money. The SNP have been in power here for almost 20 years. They can't keep blaming someone else for the state of Scotland's NHS.
James Melville?
First of all, just to go back a little bit, sometimes, even in serious debates, politics can be a force for the good in terms of debate. Not very often, but this is one of those occasions where I think it showed the best of politics in terms of how this serious issue has been debated. It's one of those rare issues where it shouldn't be about point scoring in politics, it shouldn't be three-line whips, it should be down to individual conscience and principles. And the reason for that, and this is why I err against this particular bill, is because it's one of those rare issues where every single personal circumstance is different. But within that, that brings a whole heap of consequences and complexities. And when you get to that point, then you have to tread very, very carefully on a set of legislation whereby it might not take into account everyone's circumstances. You know, for instance, it's not just a conversation to be had about assisted dying, but what about the conversation that needs to be had about assisted living? You know, why people have got to that point, almost a zero-sum game choice, and the understandable concerns of many communities, such as disabled, about aspects of coercion, about individual stories. Then you bring in things like the cost of living crisis. Someone might be in a good position with a terminal illness that hasn't yet been fully defined, and they've got the standard of living and the support networks around them. Others might not. So therefore, how can we improve the circumstances of those who don't? So it's a nuanced thing, it's a complicated thing, but obviously this will go further in other stages of this proposed legislation. We'll wait and see what happens. But my first instinct, and if you listen to the debates of late, which I was impressed by both sides of the debate in terms of the way it was conducted, but it is not a fait accompli. It's far from it. A lot of other things need to be considered.
Jamie?
Yeah, there was an interesting anecdote shared yesterday that I think you were talking about what switched in my head, and that's the fact that people already have the choice of medically assisted dying in Scotland, but the difference is you need cash to do it. You need to be able to get on a plane and go to Switzerland and do it. Those with enough money can do it already. And that inequality is what really jars with me. And that's this idea that some people we know some people have gone to Switzerland to end their life prematurely because they have to do it of their own accord. They don't want to bring their family with them because they might get prosecuted when they land back at Glasgow or Edinburgh. So they might die alone. They might die earlier than they would have wanted to, but they felt that that was the only choice they had. I don't think that choice should be based on your finances, and I don't think anyone should have to die alone in a clinic in Switzerland. And that's the reason I switched my vote.
Thanks, Jamie. Melanie Ward.
There's nothing more important than life and death, and that's what this is about. I have huge concerns about assisted dying, and I think some of the audience have really eloquently put more voice to that. It's not possible to give the choice that a small number of people seek about the end of their life without putting a much larger, vulnerable group of people in harm's way. And I think actually Anas Sarwar and Nicola Sturgeon are both absolutely right about this. Whether we look at hospice funding and palliative care, why would we choose now when the NHS is on its knees to prioritise helping people to die rather than investing in palliative care so they can have the best possible lives? We have to listen to people like my dear friend Pam Duncan-Glancy and the rest of the disabled community who say that this would help them, would give them, make it easier for them to die than it would to live. And we have to look at the international evidence, which shows that many of the audience are right to be worried about people feeling like a burden and feeling pressured into this. If we look at the evidence from Washington State, 59% of people in the last year when stats are available said that feeling like a burden is one of the reasons why they chose to go through with an assisted death. And the practicalities of it as well. I voted against this in Westminster and will do so again. Practically speaking, the process has been absolutely shambolic. We went through committee stage and actually some of the safeguards that we were promised were removed. We now have a bill in front of us in Westminster where a 16-year-old with anorexia could discuss having an assisted death with their doctor and could then go through with it when they were 18, and their parents wouldn't know potentially until they had gone through with it. Now, as a parent, I think that's completely unacceptable and cannot be allowed to happen. And I think the practicalities of it are also why we see the Royal College of Psychiatrists, as one of the audience members eloquently expressed as well, expressing real concerns about what would happen to people with depression who could be otherwise helped, and where killing themselves wouldn't be the answer to the problem. So I do think that every politician who's taking part in the debates on this in both parliaments are taking it really seriously, as they should. But I have very real concerns about what this would mean for vulnerable people in our society.
OK, thank you. There's two other questions we want to try and get to this evening. The next one comes from Thomas Sainer. Thomas, evening.
Evening. So the UK is currently facing a housing crisis, and it's particularly severe in St Andrews as well. What does the panel think is the best way to tackle this problem, both locally and nationally? Thank you.
So new figures just out show house building in Scotland has plummeted, with nearly 4,000 fewer homes being built and coming into supply in the last year compared to the previous 12 months. It's a year tomorrow, Seamus Logan, since the housing emergency was declared in Scotland. What's changed since then?
Well, we've restored the investment in social housing, which is very welcome.
Which you'd cut?
Originally, yes. But, I mean, at the end of the day, all funding that comes to the Scottish Government comes from Westminster. We'd be very clear about that. But, look, this is a complex problem. There's no simple answer to your question, because it's different in different places, and it's different at different levels. Clearly, we need to build more social houses, more affordable houses. We need to address the existing stock, which in many cases has been neglected and poorly maintained.
But we're not building enough homes. That's the bottom line,
We're not building enough homes.
Enough affordable homes, certainly.
Indeed, but the programme for government, which John Swinney just announced, as far as I understand, last week, has plans for an additional 5,000 new social homes and the possibility of 20,000 additional homes over the lifetime of this Parliament.
OK, there's obviously particular pressures here in St Andrews, where we have students with not enough housing, and also local people with not enough housing. Lady in the third row here. Yes, on you go. Yeah.
Sorry. I think the roots of the housing problem started way back in 1979 with the right to buy, which I know the SNP government rescinded, I think 2016. But the fact is, there is a dire shortage of housing for people who cannot afford to buy or to rent at extortionate rents. We need to start building, and start building quickly, affordable housing.
Yes. Thank you. Man with the glasses and the blue shirt. Yes.
When Margaret Thatcher sold off the council houses, it was money to build new council houses. Now, I don't know how many folk have here, but there's 2,000 houses getting built in St Andrews. How many council houses? Not a single one. Why are we not building council houses rather than private houses?
Thank you. And lady just in front of you, right here. Yes.
So it's great that you're saying you're going to build all these houses and things, but what about the bigger impact that has on communities? So like schools that are under pressure, and then where are these people going to get jobs and things?
OK, Seamus, I'll come back to you on this. James, you've lived in Cornwall and London, other areas with big housing pressure as well, but some specific issues here in Fife,
Some great comments. He covered all the points I was just about to mention. But Cornwall's a perfect example where there's a second homes issue, whereby communities, are, if they're wanting to move up, get a move area, or even come into Cornwall, they're priced out of the market. But it's not just about house buying, it's also about rental as well. You know, I've gone through both sectors. I was lucky enough to buy first house in my mid-20s in London at a period whereby it was relatively affordable. But my kids, if they were doing the same thing in the same place in London, no chance. It's changed, but it's also going back to rental as well. Now, there's a community that's not often discussed about housing, and that's the self-employed or people who are single. And because there is so much demand for certain properties in certain areas, there's almost competition to buy certain or rent certain properties, in particular the rental sector. And therefore, it's a selection criteria where people, if they're self-employed or they're single, they can't get on. So where do they go? And so we need to look at this, like so many other problems. It's not just one issue. It's a combination of issues. And that's before you even get onto the cost of living crisis as well, where people are under strain in terms of their food costs, their fuel costs, their energy costs. And there isn't almost a root and branch review about the different communities, what the demands are within those individual communities and how they solve that problem. But the differences are variable depending on where you live.
OK, let's hear from the people who live here in St Andrews. Man in the back row.
Nobody seems to have mentioned Airbnb and the impact that that has on specific communities.
That's an issue you have here in St Andrews?
Absolutely.
Yep. Man in the front row, down here.
I'm just sort of losing the will to live with hearing the SNP constantly go on about Westminster when they receive more money per person than anywhere else in the union. And I must say, it's quite disrespectful given the lack of opportunity that's here and how we're taxed to the nth degree, especially when compared to Europe. So I just want to ask, if housing's a real issue, what have you been spending our money on?
Well, can I come back on that straight away? Let's deal with the tax question, because it often comes up. Yes, the SNP do apply a higher level of tax to those with broader shoulders, but the majority, let me finish, the majority of taxpayers in Scotland pay less than taxpayers in other parts of the country. Now, just bear with me for a second. This issue about the Scotland receiving more per head than other parts of the UK, Scotland has a much higher level of need. We only have 8% of the population, yet 32% of the land mass. The rurality that's involved for people who live in those areas, that means that everything's much more costly. But let's get back to the question of housing, Stephen, if we may.
That's part of the need that we have here in
Yes,
Scotland.
absolutely. And it is more complex in other, it's a complex issue with different facets in different areas. One of the issues that James and I were discussing before we came in is that in certain areas, and I think it applies in St Andrews, tourists and second home owners are actually pricing people out of the market in places that are popular.
I would love to show you my tax bill, because compared to England and Scotland, I pay significantly more up here than I did in England. I think that's an insulting statement to make.
All right, let's get back to the housing issue. Hang on a second, yeah. Hang on. Man with the glasses in the middle here. Yeah, on you go.
There's certainly a problem with second homes and holiday homes around here, and there should be some restriction on the numbers of them. But I've also come across, certainly in Cumbria and in Scilly, probably other places, restrictions on sales whereby a proportion of houses need to be sold to local people. And they go at Channel Islands as well, I think. And they go at a lower rate, the more affordable rate. And I've not seen that being suggested so far.
OK. Jamie Greene, is that one solution?
Yeah, I mean, look, the original question was the housing crisis in Scotland. The country has declared a housing crisis. Many local authorities had already declared housing crisis. Edinburgh is a good example. Let me give you two solutions. One, build more homes. And it's all very well talking about programmes for government. Last year's programme for government said they were going to build more homes. The year before that, the SNP said they were going to build more homes. The year before that, they said they were going to... I mean, I could go on for 9 years. I'd be here all night. You should have built more homes when it was affordable to build homes. Now, blaming inflation that it's too expensive to build homes, it completely vindicates my point. You should have built them 10, 15 years ago when you said you were going to. But the second point is, another lady mentioned, you can't just chuck them up everywhere and anywhere, because creating more homes and more housing schemes will add pressure to local facilities. If there's no schools, there are no GP practices, there's no transport links, and you're adding to congestion around those areas as well. So we can't just chuck them out everywhere. You need a root and branch review of the planning system that allows these developers to develop, because let's face it, the only people making money out of this are the developers at the moment, and the communities that are suffering are those next to those housing developments. So yes, we need more homes, but you can't just chuck them anywhere and everywhere.
One other point as well, it's where those homes are being built as well.
Yeah, true.
Which ties into obviously the infrastructure point as well. I mean, something I would love to see happen is about the buildings that are not being used at the moment in towns and cities. You know, let's try and regenerate our towns and cities. So many of them have been hollowed out. There's death of the high street, and we need to bring people back into our towns and cities.
So how can we do that?
By redevelopment programmes of existing infrastructure, existing houses, and also buildings that are possibly not used at the moment in those areas. So, as part of the root and branch review, you've got three different aspects here. You've got in terms of the demand, and in terms of pricing, you've got the infrastructure side of things, then you've also got in terms of capacity about existing buildings as well. So rather than just put it in some new builds or extensions to towns and cities, but what about look at the existing building infrastructures in our towns and cities as well? But like so many different issues, you know the frustrating thing about it all? We're having this conversation, and on so many different issues, it's gone on too long, and there's a crisis not just in housing, there's a crisis in immigration, there's a crisis in NHS, it's a crisis in education, and it's up to our politicians and our governments not to get to that point, but here we are.
Melanie Ward, Labour have said the plan is to build houses, partly by relaxing planning, the approach to planning. Do we need that here in Scotland as well?
Yes, I think that we do. We have to be clear that almost 20 years of SNP government, and they have presided over the creation of a housing crisis here in Scotland. We're not building enough homes. Here in Fife, we have almost 500 children who are in temporary accommodation. Our children deserve better than that. They all deserve a decent, safe home and a decent place to live. And as the original question said, last year, house building in Scotland fell by 4,000, and I would contrast that with what Labour's doing in England, where 1.5 million new homes are being built. And I think one of the greatest...
That's the promise. They haven't been built yet. That's the target.
They're being built. They've started building, rapidly, and that's why some of the planning reforms are being made, as well as why funding is being put into the creation of new social housing. But I think one of the things we have to look at, it was mentioned, the programme for government, John Swinney's programme for government was announced last week. Shelter Scotland's response to that was that it was a charter for homelessness. That's not acceptable. We deserve better here in Scotland. And so I think things have got to change, and we have to take responsibility for how is it that we've got into that situation. The SNP has to take responsibility, and we deserve so much better than that.
Roz McCall.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a couple of things, because I agree with a lot has already been said, but one of the things that we need to recognise is when we go back to rental situation. Edinburgh has a massive rental problem at the moment, and it's come entirely on having rent caps on rental. Because what it's done is it's pushed the market massively. Every single time a flat comes onto the market in Edinburgh, the exponential rise of percentage for people to pay becomes massively jumps. And that has pushed so many people out of Edinburgh into the surrounding area. And that is adding to the issues. Now, this is a debate that's actually going on in Parliament right now. We are actually looking at the housing bill. Now, this is a housing bill that doesn't actually build any more houses, let me sort of highlight, and that's a big, big problem, because we need to build more houses. There's a supply and demand issue here. We just do not have enough homes for people to live in. And there's so that rent cap issue is a massive one, and we need to address that, and we need to actually have that supply there for people. Now, I think there's 600 a student accommodation block has just been passed in the local area. Now, that's another issue that we have, because... Well, that's an interesting point, but the fact of the matter is we've got a lot of students needing to use accommodation rather than student accommodation, rather than purpose-built student accommodation. So it's about freeing up the market.
Hang on a sec, please don't shout out.
No, I'm just saying it's about freeing up the market, but I am interested to know if that's all right, Steve. But it is about freeing up the market. If we've got student accommodation, purpose-built student accommodation, then we take the student issue away from the other housing, and then can release that for local people.
Sorry, what's your thought on that?
Well, I mean, the students, they pay astronomical rents. I will give them that. But that's the whole of St Andrews and the surrounding area. I've been in the rental market all the time. I've been private rental all my life. And like what you were saying, you cannot save. You've got all your bills coming in. I'm single and I'm self-employed. Why can't you just get together with the bank, say, right, you hold your rent and all your bills 3 to 5 years, because basically you're paying more rent than what you are on a mortgage. We'll give you 100% mortgage.
Agree. Yeah, absolutely. I've got a B.
Jamie?
Don't need to build houses.
Okay,
you're right.
They'll be buying houses, that's fair.
And here's the thing, I only bought my first flat a couple of years ago. In my 40s, I dare to admit. But, you know, it took me years to save up for the deposit. Here's one thing. You can build plenty of houses, but if you haven't got the money to buy them for the deposit, the banks won't give you a mortgage. The banks need to do more for young people to get them on the housing ladder in the first place. We bailed out these banks by the billions. Let's not forget that. They could do something for us and some young people in Scotland. Let's get them back on the property ladder.
Seamus Logan, the target is to build 110,000 homes in Scotland by 2032. We're roughly building about half that number every year at the moment. Are we going to make that target?
You know, Stephen, you're going to get something from me which you're maybe not used to, and that's honesty. I think we need to do better in this area, absolutely. This is not a topic that I know a great deal about, to be perfect. Sorry.
Hang on a second.
Yeah,
Carry on.
this is not a topic that I know a great deal about, more honesty. But I do know that when I was a councillor in Aberdeenshire, that we do have a lot of unoccupied stock, which if the council could invest more in maintaining, refurbishing and improving, we would have a lot of available housing, either for rent or purchase.
Okay.
And it wouldn't be at exorbitant prices either.
OK, sorry, on you go.
Yeah, why is it so difficult to build new homes? What is the reason for it? Simple question.
Seamus?
You know, there are market forces at work here which are beyond my ken. I do know that the smaller builders, the smaller developers played a much bigger role in the past, and for some reason they're not playing such a big role now. That has to be addressed.
Planning is the problem, to answer your question. There's major issues with the planning system, I think.
So that's the approach that Keir Starmer has been taking, is saying we need to loosen up.
You can't just deregulate it completely, though, because you know you have to respect communities that are already under pressure as well. So you know, as I said, it's situating these new homes in the right places.
But then one of the problems is you sort of unleash this, and you end up making mistakes, and you end up, as the illusion with whereby the green belt is at risk. Yeah. So you end up having a situation whereby, ludicrously, from a farming point of view, some farmers are concerned about aspects of compulsory purchase, which is horrendous. And in green belts, you know, there's a combination of issues. Yes, we need more housing supply. We've also got to protect a lot of our countryside infrastructures as well, and land.
Wherever you are in Scotland, you will have views on this as well. We'd love to hear about it this evening. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. That's it for tonight. We're going to be back with you next week. We're in Dumfries for next week's show. Hamilton the week after for the by-election special. Come along and join us at either of those shows. Just go to the website. If you missed any of tonight's programme, we're repeated a little bit later on BBC One Scotland, or you can watch it any time that suits you on the BBC iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel tonight and to our audience in St Andrews. It's been great to be with you for the first time. We will be back. We'll see you next week in Dumfries. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well. From all of us here, good night.